So, on our wine travels around Alentejo so far, I've been asking one particularly stupid question to everyone we interview.
The first time you asked it, I felt a bit, I don't know, maybe that's a bit embarrassing. I mean, these are proper professional winemakers. It's just a really simplistic question.
Can I ask what's your favourite Alentejo wine?
Oh, you never ask me for a favorite wine because I do not have a favorite wine. I think never say you have just one preferred wine. It's stupid.
That's Darina Lindemann, and it's fair enough. But in this country of 250 indigenous varietals, the follow-up question often provoked more thought. What about grape?
The grape, for me, here in my area, it's Touriga Nacional, it's outstanding. Then I think it's Alicante Bouschet. It's a grape really adapt very well to the Alentejo.
It's a variety that many other top winemakers like Luis Duarte are happy to praise.
What's your favourite grape?
Alicante Bouschet, yes. In the reds, Alicante. In the whites, perhaps Arinto.
Alicante Bouschet is actually French, but we kept hearing its name, even from David Baverstock.
The Australian of Espurão fame, who, just like the grape, Portugal has made its own.
Yeah, I would say Mouchão and Alicante Bouschet. I think it's a fantastic variety. The French, they think it's a rubbish variety because it's a red juice variety. They just use it in the Languedoc area for colouring up lighter wines. So they add a bit of Alicante Bouschet to beef it up, you know. But in the Alentejo, yeah, Mouchão have done great things with it.
Alicante Bouschet is one of the few red grapes with red juice. Most red wines take their colour from the skins. It was hand-crossed in the 1800s to help weak French wine look better in the bars of Paris.
Alicante Bouschet was introduced to Portugal by Mouchão, one of the oldest wineries in Alentejo, in the faint hope it might resist the phylloxera bug ravaging Europe's wine grapes at the time.
Now Mouchão is known for producing some of the best Alicante Bouschet wines in the world. And so this episode, we're heading there to discover what some call a bomb-proof Swiss Army knife of a grape.
It's a story of the British-Portuguese Reynolds family who brought it here and still make wine today by foot treading, hand pressing and aging it in barrels big enough to live in.
And it's about a winery entwined with generations of spies, explorers and cork farmers who lived in palaces, smuggled Jews from Nazi-occupied Europe and still keep John Wayne's gun in their chimney.
Isn't that a nice sound?
It's a great sound. There it is. Welcome to this latest episode of Anna and Al's big Portuguese wine adventure, the Reddest Grape. It takes us to France, where Henri Boucher created something very special and where his Alicante is now making a comeback, and to America's west coast, where it once made up 40% of Napa Valley's grapes.
But we're starting a little closer to our home here in Alentejo.
Hi there, good morning. Hi Ian, how's things?
Olá, como é que está? Tudo bem?
Mouchão is a beautiful old estate, sunk into a little valley not too far from the town of Estremoz. It's surrounded by grapevines, pine nut plantations and olive groves. And it's run by Ian Reynolds Richardson, who shares his grandfather's passion for traditionally made Alicante Bouschet.
I'm Ian Richardson. I've been here I was here for quite a long stint in the 90s, and I was winemaker here. Now I've got somebody who's much more up to date than I am and probably doing a better job of it. I do some of the viticulture. Hamilton does all the winemaking, Hamilton Rage, and then I'm still helping run the place for the family. And so it's very much a traditional winery, so a lot of the people who work here are the third, fourth generation people from the local village who are very much a part of Mouchão. We're very much a local winery.
So where are we standing right now? And tell us a bit about the building.
Well, we're in the middle of a patio of the building. So it really goes back to the turn of the century. And it was actually purpose-built for making wine. So we still use all the lagars. We've got 9 lagars here. These are the treading troughs. And basically all the winemaking functions here are the same as they were going back to 1901 when this was built. The only thing we had really added to the place was electricity in 1991, so that's quite recent.
Wow, yeah, it is recent.
And so the only difference that really made was to the pumps, even though the old manual pumps still work. So we've now got electrical pumps, and we've also got cooling. Otherwise, everything's exactly as it was. Obviously, our sort of distinguishing factors here at Mouchão are probably our variety, which is what Mouchão's really known for. This was like the birthplace of Alicante Bouschet, going back to the 1800s, late 1800s. And so that really makes us who we are, in the sense that combined with the way we make our wines in the lagar with the stems, so no de-stemming at all, so that brings a certain fresh mintiness to all our wines. And then it's obviously aged in old tonels, so 5,000 litre tonels over 5 or 6 years. So that sort of slow oxidation process is very much the sort of formula, if you like. I've told you rather too much of all our secrets now. So.
No, that's great. I wondered, just to follow up on that, because we were intrigued.
The whole winery is steeped in history. Founded when Portugal had a king, surviving the destructive decades of the Salazar dictatorship, and then weathering the communist aftermath of the 1974 Carnation Revolution, when the family estate was appropriated by the people.
Well, should we have a spin round?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Come in, let's have a look at
this. This is the first building we're going into?
Yep. So this is the oldest wing, 1901. And really, what you see is what there is. It's just basically rows of tonels. So these tonels are the heads are made of mahogany and monkey tree. And the staves, they're 100 odd years old, these ones. They're very thick. And the staves, we had to recover all these tonels. So
they're stunning. They're
just
so
for people
beautiful.
who don't quite follow, because I didn't to start with, a tonel is basically a 5,000 litre barrel. So it's just like an oversized giant barrel.
But you could think of it, if you think about like really high-end glamping, these are so big that they would make the most beautiful and really expensive place.
Do you know they're doing that? They do that in the Douro somewhere.
They
don't
do.
I think they turn them into bedrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of a way of telling people how large they are. They are so large you could sleep in them.
You could certainly put a single bed in there, couldn't you?
No, you could put a...
You'd probably have to widen the door a bit.
Yeah.
There's really sort of two periods here at Mouchão. There's before pre-revolution and post-revolution. Mm-hmm. So 1975, they took over the place, the local cooperative, and for 10 years it had been expropriated. So when we got it back, or my grandfather got it back in 1986, sadly he died at the end of that year, but when he got it back, this place, if you'd opened these doors here, it would have just been, staves and hoops all over the floor. There was no wine here at all. The vineyards had stopped producing because they'd forgotten to prune the vines for about 3 or 4 years. And,
were they retrievable? I was wondering that.
Largely not.
No.
So we would have had sort of productions going to...
Although they had to replant everything, they were able to take cuttings of the old Alicante Bouschet vines and continue a line going back a century.
In the chaotic years following the revolution, the nationalised cooperative didn't know how to run the family winery, but did do wonders for brand recognition.
Because they took over the winery, they ended up by selling all the wine in the top hotels in Lisbon, the Ritz and the Sheratons and the Hiltons and all that sort of stuff. So they had all these amazing stocks well into the late 70s and 80s of stuff that was sold from here. That's why this place was empty in 86 when we got it back. But they helped make the name of Mouchão in that sense, because we weren't really known outside the local, freguesia, with the local, villages and parish council around here. So it was the cooperative that helped sort of make our name for us. And then what we've been doing ever since the place was given back in 86 is recovering all the tonels. So the first 3 years, we had coopers living here for 2 years, just basically with bonfires outside and just rebuilding all these things. There are really only 2 tonels that actually had good enough quality to put our best wine in, and that ended up being the origin of the name Tonel 3-4 as well, which is Tonels number 3 and 4.
Mouchão's most recently released Tonel 3 and 4 wines from 2013 sell for more than €200 a bottle.
I'll show you. Do you want to see the lagars?
Yes, please.
We've had a go at stomping. We went to Torre de Palma and had a go at stomping in the harvest season.
Oh, that's great fun though, isn't it?
Wow, look at this.
So these are actually made of marble, even though they were relined by my grandfather with cement in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing, I think, is the fact that we do all our reds in lagars. Most wineries have a lagar or two for tourist reasons or whatever. Mm-hmm. But no, even our Dorofale, our entry wine, is made the same way as Mouchão. It's all goes through the lagars, hand-picked, through the window, into the lagars, trodden for 4 or 5 days, 6 days.
The grapes are hand-pressed into the tonels. The beauty of Mouchão is its calm, its simplicity, and its traditional methods.
generations of the Reynolds family, making wine for more than 100 years with the support of generations of the Alabassa cellarmaster family, a relationship which Ian learnt from when he first got involved.
It was when I came here in, I think it was 93, the first time. I came fresh from Rioja with all sorts of, technological ideas, and I was really just a fly on the wall for those first 2 years on purpose, just to see what Alabassa was doing, how he was making the wine. And I was itching to put some stainless steel in over here and do this and that, and I'm very glad I didn't. And after a couple of years, just reached the conclusion, why change a winning formula? And what made Mouchão so good were these little secrets, if you like using stems.
Because what we've been learning as we've been going along has been that the stems tend to be taken off because they can make it very tannin. The seeds being crushed too much, which I guess you don't do because you're using your feet to crush them.
That's exactly
But also the stems can be too tanniny, but you're doing that, but by being very careful.
Being careful with what the stems look like when we bring them in. So we don't just look at sugars and acids, we have to look at the stems and chew them and chew the pips and everything else. And then of course the actual winemaking process, because it's trodden, is incredibly soft. There's no mechanics here, there's no metal on metal, there's no pumps being used for over pumping. So it's just basically feet on the floor, the pips don't get crushed. And then of course we use these lovely old presses which were here since 1901. They're manual presses and basket presses, and you still find them in some parts of the world, but very often they're hydraulically powered. And these are fully manual, so that's a sort of rarity. You see it in the occasional sort of little house in Quinta in the interior of Portugal, but in terms of having a winery, and these are the only presses that we got. So I think
that's it? Just those two?
No, these two in this wing, there's another two in the other wing. And that's it, yeah. But they're very labour intensive.
Yeah,
very labour intensive. But they're incredibly soft, very high quality.
Okay, next wing.
Okay, let's do it.
Of course, at the heart of Mouchão's reputation is its grapes. Alicante Bouschet was introduced to Alentejo in the 1800s by one of Ian's ancestors.
But this is where things get quite complicated. So I think it's time for a clink and a think about today's grape obsession. Alicante Bouschet.
Monsieur Louis Boucher began by crossing the original red juice grape Teinturier du Cher with Aramon Noir to create Petit Boucher in 1824.
This gave wine with a deeper colour, if not a better quality. But it was his son, Henri, who took things a stage further by crossing his father's Petit Boucher with other grapes. He tried many different combinations. Crossing with Aramon created Grand Noir, for example.
But the most successful cross was Petit Boucher and Grenache, a Spanish grape also known as Alicante, named after the Spanish city. And so, Alicante Boucher was born.
I do like that sound. In 1882, one of Ian's ancestors, William Reynolds, was in charge of Portugal's efforts to combat phylloxera, which was destroying Europe's vineyards at the time.
That's why he made connections with the Bouchers and Montpellier University. Next thing, two professors arrived with some cuttings, and Alicante Boucher's big Portuguese wine adventure began.
It was only really when it hit the Alentejo that people started realizing that if you do produce a reduced quantity per hectare, that Alicante Boucher behaves like nothing they'd seen before. You could actually get huge amounts of concentration of everything. We forget as well that it was 40% of Napa Valley in the 1920s.
Really?
Yeah, 1920s, 1930s. It was 40% of all
Really?
grapes in Napa Valley. And then bit by bit, it sort of started getting substituted by what they then called the more noble varieties. Syrah was already there, but then things like Cabernet and Merlot and all the Bordeaux varieties started appearing. But it was for years and years just misunderstood, and it disappeared. And now it's sort of very much coming back. Even the Douro, they're planting it all over the place. The Alentejo, if you went back to the 1990s, perhaps there was only sort of 100 hectares of Alicante Boucher in the Alentejo. Now there are 8,000.
Wow.
And as Jancis Robinson said, it's largely due to Mouchão.
Yeah.
So, whatever. So that's really a bit of the local history.
We'll be back at Mouchão in a bit to delve more into the family history with Ian Reynolds Richardson. But first, let's head to the birthplace of Alicante Boucher.
You might remember us talking about our French winemaker friend Baptiste in our first episode. He's the one that described the tatty 20 or so vines we found on our land as a not unmanageable parcelle. His family were growing grapes in the south of France even before the Bouchers were getting busy.
And those two professors were bringing cuttings to Portugal from Montpellier, just down the road from Baptiste's family winery. And we were surprised when we caught up with him recently and he told us about his new wine, a single varietal Alicante Boucher from the Languedoc.
So I'm Baptiste Carrière-Pradal and I come from originally the southern France, close to Montpellier, born in a wine estate between Béziers and Pézenas, which is called Domaine de la Massole.
When we saw your new wine label and that it was 100% Alicante Boucher, we thought, we know something about that. Tell us about Alicante Boucher and why you're now using it and some of the history of it.
Yes, so I will start by the very reason why initially people were planting Alicante Boucher. In the mid-20th century, the destination of many of the wine that were produced was for daily consumption. And at the time, what was happening is that a lot of production, there was very high yields in the different vineyards, and therefore the wines were ultimately rather pale in color. And therefore there was a need to have a so-called tainting vine, a grape that will be so deep in color that it will allow to change the color of otherwise pale wine. And so therefore that's why initially people were planting. Every estate had always a little bit of Alicante, which was meant to give a deeper red ruby color to otherwise pale wine.
The family was looking to buy an extra parcel of grapes near the estate for Baptiste's wedding present.
Actually, a neighbor of us was selling a piece of land that had Alicante on top of it. And initially, when we bought it, we thought, the quality of the soil was very good, so we thought we're going to plant other type of grapes on it. And then the first harvest, we thought, let's try anyway. So we were going in the vineyards and started to taste some of the berries. And with the taste of it, we thought, actually, we can do something with that. And therefore, that's when we started to bring it to our winery. And the first year we started to try the wine and it was absolutely delicious. And since then we removed the field from the list of the fields that needs to be rooted to just really maintain it. So we reworked a lot to a parcel which has been planted in 1955. So that's the story of our wine, and that's why you see the label of it with a red to remember the taintness of the color, and yet a very unique type of cépage.
One thing we noticed that obviously it came to Portugal, Alicante Boucher, and it's now probably the most exciting and interesting grape in Alentejo. Alicante Boucher, really, everyone's loving it. And the discovery that it works very well here, do you think that's got something to do with the higher temperatures? Do you think that it's the kind of grape that might do well with climate change if everything is getting hotter, given that it's much hotter here in Alentejo than the south of France?
You're completely correct. It's a type of grape that definitely needs a lot of heat to be able to mature properly and to gain its complexity. It's so far a cépage which is extremely resistant to drought. So therefore, indeed, if there is little water, it can still prevail, and therefore it's very robust and rustic. And I always thought that also because, anyway, coming back to the name of it, Alicante, which is one of the most southern cities in Europe, that therefore we have definitely a grape that just also by its name and origin initially was able to withstand harsh climates.
Northern California doesn't have such a harsh climate, but it's at a similar latitude. And we had to follow up on Ian's revelation that 40% of Napa's grapes were Alicante Boucher in the 1920s and 30s.
So let's dive even deeper into the Alicante Boucher rabbit hole and burrow to California.
My name is Morgan Twain Peterson. I'm the winemaker and owner of Bedrock Wine Company in Sonoma, California.
Morgan is a master of wine. His Bedrock wines have won a load of prizes, and he knows a lot about grapes and about history.
Alicante Boucher is a very widespread variety here in California. I think like most parts of the world, it's a real sort of Swiss Army knife in some ways in terms of what it can do. In terms of the history of California, like every place, it got decimated by phylloxera in the late 1870s, and where I am in Sonoma was particularly intensely planted, so when phylloxera hit, it spread very quickly and really decimated the area.
Those grapes were mainly Spanish varieties planted by missionaries. Winemakers took the opportunity to replant with the pick of European grapes.
What that meant is in the 1880s, the very nascent state of California realized that there was an opportunity on the global stage to potentially make wines that competed with the wines of France and Spain and Italy and everywhere else. In 1880, California was planted to 90% mission grapes, but by 1890, 90% of the state was non-mission varieties. So there's this enormous sea change event that happened within a decade. One of the grape varieties that was brought over and started to be experimented with was Alicante Bouschet. Throughout the 1900s, it became one of kind of like the handful of really commonly interplanted field-blended varieties with Zinfandel. But then in the 1920s, Prohibition happened. People think that, the wine industry was decimated, and in many ways, the wine industry was, but the grape industry was not. Plantings of grapes more than doubled during Prohibition in California, and that was to feed home winemaking, because under the Volstead Act, which created Prohibition as a head of household, you're still allowed to make quite a lot of wine. I forget the exact number, but it's a lot of wine. And Alicante Bouschet is probably the most bomb-proof of all varieties. It's got a thick skin, it's loose clustered, it doesn't rot. So Alicante really fit the bill if you're going to put something on a train car and ship it for a week and a half to stockyards in New York or Boston or Chicago or wherever. And so at that point, it really grew. And so we still see spattered plantings throughout California planted in the mid-1920s of almost pure Alicante Bouschet vineyards.
From the 1960s, Californian wines moved from blends to single varieties, so-called fighting varieties like Chardonnay or Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. Today, Alicante is not so well regarded.
In Northern California, it's sensitive to frost and isn't high in tannins, but it keeps good colour in extreme heat. It's very much a blending grape that Morgan's considering to plant with climate change in mind.
A lot of our vineyards are very diverse. We have upwards of 30 different interplanted varieties in a lot of our vineyards from the 1880s and 1890s. And really the only other place now where we see that many varieties is in Portugal.
And field blends are very much part of the approach back at Mouchão.
We'll do the tasting in here.
Passing through a wall of corks.
Oh, you've not even been in here before, have you?
No, not been in here
We
before.
just had this redone about
Oh, it's beautiful.
2 years ago, a year and a half ago.
Oh, this is fun.
Oh, in here. Okay. Thank you. Wow. Okay, so can you describe this place?
This is the old cantina, and we've now changed it to a shop and tasting room because it's at the front of the winery.
Is this your 1894 map
Yes.
of the...
Yeah, this is the vineyard here.
Oh.
And that's where we are. We're about here somewhere.
The map has the Alicante Bouschet marked on it, proving it was planted in the late 1880s by William Reynolds in his efforts to counter phylloxera.
And is this the range of wines laid out in a line?
Effectively, yeah.
So just explain them all to us if you can,
well,
just quickly.
Don Rafael is the sort of entry level, and there's a red and a white.
Ian talked us through the range of Mouchão wines. From the Dom Rafael, there's the Ponte, which in the red is the best blend of the non-Alicante grapes, and in the white is Verdelho, another grape Mouchão is famous for.
So it's a pure Verdelho, just to bring back the old tradition.
Wow.
Now it's got a nice little, this guy called William Coble, who was here in 1909, one thing he said was, as it says here on the back label, the visitor to southern Portugal who fails to demand Mouchão Verdelho of the genuine kind will have my pity but not my sympathy. So it's quite a fun little phrase on the back. And then we got the Mouchão.
That's their flagship, which is mostly Alicante Bouschet with about 15% of another grape, either Aragonês or Trincadeira. Then there's a top-level Tunel 3 and 4, which is pure Alicante Bouschet.
Mouchão is an old reference to the Alentejo. There are really only 4 wineries going back 100 years. And so it's an old reference, and we're doing everything the same, so...
I was thinking about it wandering around as a complete newcomer to Alentejo wines. They're keeping the traditions, the kindness towards previous generations and the period when it was taken over, and finding something positive in that. It has so much tradition. This is why everybody loves Mouchão, but it really shines through everything you say, and it's amazing.
Thank you. I don't think I could add to that, but anyway, it's just, I think the fact that things are made the old way, and nowadays winemaking is really for producing wines that need to be sold within 2 years, 3 years, And I'd say 99% of all wineries are looking for sort of turnover and so on. And Mouchão has kept things the way it always was. And these are wines for keeps, so you hang on to them for a good many years. So the 54 we haven't had for a long while, but it's still drinking, can you believe it? And wow. What's doing really well still are wines like the 79, the 85, the 87 is wonderful right now. And these are wines for holding on to. So in that sense, it's a sort of reference to a lot of people who are sort of winemaking or enophiles, that Mouchão is a reference that people can go back to, and it's not very common these days to have people making wines for laying down, and it's certainly not fashionable, that's for sure.
The wines are great, and they even sell fresh, new wines in 2-litre flagons. Our extra episode on Mouchão goes into much more detail with winemaker Hamilton Reich, because time is tight, and there's still a lot more of surprising Reynolds history to tell.
They started out like so many English families in the early 1800s. The fundamentals of their business was probably wine. It was port wine. And I don't think it went particularly well for them, but very quickly they realized, the earliest Reynolds is Thomas Reynolds, he realized that his future lay not in exporting port. There were rather too many people doing that already, but he thought corks was the future. So really the history of the Reynolds family is more directly attached or linked to cork production than it was even wine.
Within 50 years, they had cork depots across southwestern Spain and southern Portugal, and more than 100 estates.
They were responsible for producing at least half of Portugal's production in those days, yeah.
They kept their passion for wine and their love of exploring new frontiers.
The Reynolds family physically split up in 1850. Half the family, there were 16 members of the Reynolds family that went off to New Zealand. Oh. Yep. They all took off in a ship, which they bought in Scotland, and off they went to New Zealand. And
they took merino sheep to the South Island, an incredible adventure at the time.
But the politics of a wealthy family had its complications.
William came back from New Zealand in the name of his father to try and reclaim part of what he owned, because things weren't going very well, and married his first cousin, Eliza.
2 Reynolds brothers married 2 high society sisters. They owned palaces and estates. The family tree branched across continents. And through old photos, Ian explained how his grandfather, Albert Hugh Bouncer Reynolds, made Mouchão what it is today.
So Bouncer was really the founder, if you like, of Mouchão wine as a bottled wine, as a brand, and everything else. Yeah. He was a lawyer in Lisbon. I'm not sure. They've all got a bit of a history of working for the British government. Really? Yeah, during the war. So it's his brother Victor, the one holding the donkey there. Victor lived in Estremoz, so he used to smuggle the people across from Vichy, France, during the war, and the Jews and everything else. And my grandfather, Bouncer, was in charge of which ships were allowed to come into the port of Lisbon. So he used to smuggle all these people onto these ships and across America. By then the submarines had stopped doing all their damage. Yeah. And that's how a lot of the people escaped through Spain and Portugal.
I just don't think we're even scratching the surface of what's an absolutely fascinating family history.
I think this is a book.
Have you written it?
My mother's older sister, she was a spy, MI6.
Oh, was she? Okay.
But they only really found out at the funeral because they had all these sort of dignitary people, old ministers showing up at the funeral. Wow. And they thought it was a bit strange, what's going on here, and my uncle found out that she'd obviously kept a secret all her life, that she'd been working in the Foreign Office and for MI6.
Wow, amazing.
It's amazing how everything seems to cross Mouchão. It's just amazing.
Sheep, palaces, spies with donkeys, MI6. It wasn't even that surprising when Ian pulled an old gun out of the chimney.
Well, it was a little.
It's just a fun little thing.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of fun. That's a 1898 Winchester. This was left here by a highwayman in roughly 1910. Left this beauty.
Left his gun.
He spent the night here and then took off in the morning and left his gun behind.
Wow.
It's kind of fun.
Amazing.
It's a lovely bit. I'll repeat it. It's the one that John Wayne uses in all his movies. It's modelled.
Really?
It's very modelled. Quite fun.
See what is Mouchão?
Yeah.
Understand now?
We're starting to, I think. We're starting to understand.
Thanks so much for listening to our latest episode of Anna and Al's Big Portuguese Wine Adventure and our crazy deep dive into Alicante Boucher.
I didn't think we'd be getting quite so obsessed with one grape variety when we started making this series, let alone broadening our horizons to the south of France and California.
No, but Mouchão has amazing history, doesn't it? An incredible family story with lots of twists and turns.
And there's so much more to say about the wines and the winery, but we'll post a separate bonus episode where we go into all that in a bit more detail.
The next full episode will be picking up themes from the cooperative wineries, how affordable wines have been made in Portugal for generations, and why they're still an important force today.
But for now, please subscribe to the series and tell all your friends about it. You'll be here in Portugal tasting the wine before you even know it.
See you next time!